is perched atop a huge Saturn IB rocket waiting for a ride into Earth orbit, where it hopes to spend 6.5 hours undergoing tricky maneuvers designed to show it can venture safely to the moon. Minutes ago, Launch Control announced, "The Lunar Module checking out well at this time. We're keeping an eye on the temperatures associated with the environmental control system, and a recent report shows that also is satisfactory. We are counting, and the count is going well at this time." Called LEM for short, the spacecraft is that section of the Apollo spaceship which will actually land astronauts on the moon and then rocket them from the lunar surface to begin their return trip to Earth. Jay Barbary, NBC News, Cape Kennedy.
America's first lunar module is scheduled to blast off from Cape Kennedy in about 15 minutes. Technical difficulties have been overcome, and space officials say the countdown is proceeding smoothly. The craft is designed to eventually ferry astronauts to the moon.
This is Art Thompson at Cape Kennedy. The countdown is still moving on. Here is Jack King at Apollo Launch Control.
Counting. T-minus 4, and all still going well during these final minutes of the Apollo 5 mission countdown. We've gone through our final status report here in the blockhouse. Mission Director Bill Snyder and Launch Director Rocco Petrone have given a go for launch at this time. We'll stand by for a report from the range as our countdown continues. Now coming up on the 3-minute and 30-second mark of our count. T-minus 3 minutes, 30 seconds, and counting. Just a matter of seconds ago, we received confirmation from the range that we are go for launch. The destruct system now has been armed aboard the Saturn IB vehicle as we approach the 3-minute mark in the countdown. The hydraulic pumps aboard the first stage are on, ready to help activate those 8 engines, which are due to ignite at the 3-second mark.
Time, there are bolts holding the bird on the pad. Less than 2 minutes away from the actual launch. This particular Saturn IB launch vehicle is the same one on which the Apollo spacecraft was sitting that had the fire when the 3 astronauts were killed a little over a year ago. So this is the second time that this particular launch vehicle has been on the pad. As Art said, it generates 1.6 million pounds of thrust. And though this is quite a bit smaller than the Saturn V that was launched last November, you'll still hear a tremendous roar as it leaves its launch pad here at Cape Kennedy. The Saturn IB will launch 3 astronauts in just a few months from now, when the first manned test. We are into the final seconds now before the launch of the Saturn IB. 1,300,000 pounds will be lifted off of that pad in just a moment. 40 seconds and counting, according to Jack King at Launch Control. We're on the automatic sequencer, on internal power. Everything is ready to go. All lights are green, according to Jack King. And this is the critical moment. 21 seconds and counting. All eyes straining out toward Complex 37, where the rocket stands. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. There's ignition. Brilliant red flame shooting out from the bottom of the rocket. There it's beginning to move up slowly, rising slowly on into the blue Florida sky with a huge ball of flame shooting out from the bottom with a plasma effect trailing from that. You're beginning to get a little bit of the roar in the background now as it rolls out over the Atlantic Ocean, climbing ever steadily. 1,600,000 pounds of thrust pushing against the Earth, raising that heavy rocket with its full load on up into the sky. And here comes the roar. Saturn IB continues continues into a roll and pitch program as it arcs out over the Atlantic. Everything looks beautiful from here. Of course, in the semi-darkness, it's just a big ball of fire as it rises higher and higher. The first stage burns about 2.5 minutes, and we should be able to see it for the entire time. There's a huge cloud of smoke still hanging over the launch pad, and now the rocket has hit the colder atmosphere, and it's leaving a huge contrail. Kind of a stair step to the stars. Moving out on over the Atlantic, here's mission control.
Yeah, quite closely here.
Just as
The official launch time is 48 minutes, 9 seconds past the hour. Coming up on staging.
Coming up on staging now, and we should be able to see that very quickly. Still moving out, and the contrail is clearly visible. Where it first hit the cold atmosphere, there's a huge white billow of smoke that looks like a big white fleecy cloud. They're staging.
We've had inboards and outboards on the first stage of the S1B, and we've apparently had separation.
Apparently had separation. That's
The J2 engine of the S4B second stage has ignited. The thrust appears all right. Still, the clocks here in mission control are following very closely to the line. This S4B J2 engine will last some 451 seconds.
The particular engine that he's talking about now is the third stage of the Saturn V rocket that will carry America's astronauts to the moon. We've almost lost sight of the rocket. I can still see a pinpoint of light far out over the Atlantic. And that huge cloud that was caused when the rocket hit the colder atmosphere is still
The water valves aboard the LEM spacecraft have been opened. Still, the plot boards here in mission control are hewing very closely to the line. We're now at T-minus 3 minutes, 36 seconds after liftoff.
Local sunset here at the gate comes at 5:52 Eastern Time, and this launch came almost exactly 4 minutes before sunset, and this has been a spectacular sight, Les.
It has that. Can you still see the pinpoint of light as yet, Art?
It just faded out for me. My eyesight may not be as good as yours is.
Well, I had lost it.
All flight control positions here in the mission control center all gave him a go. The status lights on his console are all green.
That sounds good for an orbit. The spacecraft should be inserted into orbit approximately 10 minutes after liftoff.
168 nautical miles downrange.
It will enter an orbit of approximately 138 by 107 miles, statute miles above the Earth, for the first revolution. It will change its orbit several times during the test.
The officer reports to Flight Director Gene Grant that the trajectory stood from his standpoint.
Everything seems good up to this point.
Some 10 minutes and 1 second after liftoff, we'll have the shutdown of the S4B second stage J2 engine.
After the spacecraft gets into orbit, there will be a separation of a nose cone that was over the lunar bug. Normally, there is the command module in which the 3 astronauts ride sitting on top.
T+5 minutes.
But in this particular instance, where the only thing that they're checking is the lunar module, the command module was left off, and a small nose cone placed over it. This will separate, and the lunar module will leave the second stage booster, and they will conduct some experiments with that second stage booster, and then it will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and disintegrate.
The estimated lifetime of all systems aboard the lunar module are something like 13 hours. Of course, it could last a little bit longer than that or a little bit less. And there are going to be some weary flight control people and a corps of weary news reporters, I'm sure, before this one comes to an end.
None of the lunar module is going to be recovered. All of the tests will be completed, and then eventually the different pieces of the lunar module will enter the Earth's atmosphere and be burned up. The primary purpose of this is to see if the propulsion systems function in a weightless condition, because these are the systems that will lower the lunar module to the moon and then lift the astronauts from the moon back to the mothership as it circles the moon.
We're still in the burn of the second stage of the Saturn I rocket as it fires towards space and the insertion into orbit of the first Apollo lunar module. This is Art Thompson at Cape Kennedy. We're back here, and the second stage of the Saturn I is still burning as the spacecraft streaks toward an orbit. Still at the press site near the launch pad at Cape Kennedy is Les Roberson.
All the control positions here in the Mission Control Center. Again, it is all go. He has green lights on his console. Booster reports to the launch vehicle is going good. We're still some minute and a half away from stage 2 cutoff. Yes, we're the second stage.
Something that I missed this time. Normally, when we do the broadcast of the Apollo flights and the previous Gemini flights, our broadcast studio was on the Cape proper, and the flavor of the news reporters and the hubbub of activity near the press site has been lost to me this time, but Les, you've been able to enjoy it again, I'm sure.
Well, I'm sure that you can hear the noise in the background, as there must be at least 200 reporters all around, some of them broadcasting, others typing, and the majority of them chattering. But the flavor is definitely here.
So America's maiden Apollo moon bug is on its way for 6 orbits around the Earth. And the goal of the initial unmanned trial run to prove its engines can safely ease 2 men down to the pockmarked lunar surface, give them a sure start back home after their surface exploring has been done.
Just a moment. America's Lunar Module 1, or LEM as it is called, is performing flawlessly tonight on the first steps of a busy unmanned exercise in Earth orbit. The test flight is designed to determine if LEM can properly ferry astronauts to and from the moon's surface. More on the mission from CBS News correspondent Steve Rowan. Just at sunset, the 8 rocket engines of the Saturn IB roared into life, and with 1.5 million pounds of thrust began pushing the 16-ton payload, Lunar Module number 1, into a cloudless sky on a long tail of flame. The launch came almost 4 hours later than scheduled, after a lengthy delay caused by 2 problems in the ground support equipment at Pad 37B. But there was obviously nothing wrong with the 2-stage booster, and 10 minutes later, the lunar module, wrapped in its protective cocoon of aluminum, was traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, 100 miles in space, having achieved orbit. After the initial task of getting it into orbit, the LEM must first get itself out of its protective aluminum tube, something the astronauts normally would do by hooking on and pulling it up. The space module that someday may land in America on the moon is in orbit tonight. No one aboard, but this unmanned Apollo shot is an important milestone. ABC Science Editor Jules Bergman reports. The first flight of the Lunar Module, the strange-looking spacecraft that one day must land our astronauts on the moon. It's the toughest unmanned Apollo flight ever attempted, and here's the way it went.
2, we have ignition. We have
the Saturn IB rocket carrying the lunar module into space roared off Pad 37 here in a flawless takeoff. It's the same rocket that was scheduled to carry astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee into orbit nearly a year ago before the Apollo 1 fire that took their lives and stopped the space program in its tracks. It was put in storage until this flight. The Saturn booster performed perfectly, carrying the 16-ton lunar spacecraft into Earth orbit, the 15th straight success for Saturn I.
This is Apollo 5, the first all-up unmanned flight test for the Lunar Module, the spacecraft in which man will make his first landing on the moon, the final major piece of Apollo hardware to be tested. Now the lunar module, dubbed LM-1, sits in its protective technological cocoon atop the tested and proven Saturn IB launch vehicle, waiting for the boost into the environment for which it was designed, space. It will not return to Earth, but will continue in a gradually decaying orbit until it re-enters and burns up. In the blockhouse at Cape Kennedy, the men have assembled to do the job. From Marshall Space Flight Center, from the Kennedy Space Center, and from the Manned Spacecraft Center, they have come to get the mission into orbit. The rocket to do the job has been sitting on the pad at Cape Kennedy for over a year. Intensive inspections and care by teams from Marshall and from Kennedy Space Centers have kept it ready for this day. Originally, it was scheduled to put the first 3 Apollo astronauts into orbit, but the tragedy of January 1967 ended those hopes. Today, it sits on pad 37, still waiting for its mission.
That's affirmative.
RTC, will you site select? Guido, GNC, and ECOM to Mila.
In mission control in Houston, flight controllers wait to take over command of the mission as soon as it lifts off the pad. Among these men are 4 who watch with special interest. Astronauts Jim McDivitt and Rusty Schweikert, who are scheduled to fly the first manned lunar module. And in a support room next to the control room, astronauts Frank Borman and Bill Anders, who will fly the lunar module on its rehearsal of the first manned lunar mission.
Go flight. GNC. Go flight. Procedures. Go flight. AFD. Go. Network. Go flight. Computer soup. Go flight. RTC, you on AFD conference.
RTC is on AFD conference.
Roger. Best of luck.
Beacon number 2 is go. Okay, go ahead and reload.
All flight controllers preconditioned for attachment 2 of the internal count.
Apollo 5 is one of the most complex space missions ever flown. It has been compared to taking a brand new design airplane with brand new design engines and flying it from New York to Los Angeles by remote control.
Only when you get to Los Angeles, rather than landing it international, you thunk it in about 30,000 feet of water and never see it. Then you have to evaluate the performance of the aircraft based on the telemetry that you got as it flew over Kansas City and Oklahoma and so on.
So men wait in tracking stations around the world for the flight of Lunar Module number 1. For it is their information that will tell us whether it is safe for man. But what is this craft called the Lunar Module?
LM is a vehicle that has been designed for a particular job, and that job is to land on the lunar surface. It doesn't look like an airplane or a spacecraft in the old sense. It's not smooth. It's very thin skinned, has a descent propulsion stage, a large descent engine which will be used to land the vehicle on the lunar surface in a manner very similar to that of a helicopter, except that instead of using blades for a lift, we'll be using a rocket propulsion engine. And at the upper stage, the cabin and ascent engine stage will be used to lift off from the lunar surface and make the subsequent rendezvous with the command and service module.
So the LM is really the taxi that provides the transportation between the orbiting command module and the lunar surface.
The Lunar Module is a unique engineering concept. Designed and built on Earth, it is out of place on its native planet. The airless surface of the moon, the empty reaches of space, this is where it belongs. The comfortable pull of Earth's gravity, the protective, life-giving atmosphere, these, to the Lunar Module, nicknamed LEM, are the hostile elements. Its engines cannot lift its own weight against the pull of the Earth. If it could fly on Earth, the aerodynamic forces of the atmosphere would tear it apart. So how do you test the Lunar Module before it flies in space? You test its engines in the man-made vacuum of an engine test stand. Its operating systems in gigantic vacuum chambers. You tumble it on stands in engineering laboratories. But the real test is when it flies.
Roger, I am in flight control. Final status check, booster. Go. Retro. Go. Fido. Go. Guidance. Go. Econ. Go.
While the primary instructions for the mission are carried on board the LEM, the men on Earth in mission control can take over and fly it if necessary. But why all these elaborate precautions and details in an unmanned flight?
Unmanned LEM-1 mission is one of the key missions in the entire lunar landing program. You must remember that the LEM is every bit as important as spacecraft as the command module, the Gemini, or the Mercury was, and this is the first flight of the vehicle. Naturally, we'll all be looking at it with very, very keen interest.
Flight CVTS Black 2, verify your go for launch. Roger, we are go for launch. Okay, all flight controllers, let's play it cool.
Launch sequence start.
14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, ignition command. Ignition detected. Transmit 5 enter. Flight start, 5 enter. Thrust okay. Affirmative. Program 11. Okay, TOK P11. Roll pitch start. Roll and pitch. Go on IP. Go IP. Stand by for nose.
The launch and insertion into Earth orbit are on the nose.
Cutoff plus 50.
Roger, cutoff plus 50.
The aerodynamic shroud is jettisoned.
Roger, nose cap jet.
Now, the next critical step, the opening of the protective metallic petals and the separation of Lunar Module 1 from its cocoon.
RTC booster, transmitting slot deploy. Roger. We are transmitting slot deploy. Okay, all flight controllers, we have slot deploy A and B relay indications, no physical monitor indication.
Everything is nominal.
We get a go for separation.
On schedule, the reaction control engines of Lunar Module 1 pull it free of its protective cocoon. The space butterfly rests its wings before it flies. Now begins the long coast preparatory to the first firing of the descent engine. While the LEM coasts, tracking stations pinpoint its position and determine its orbit with accuracy. In Houston Mission Control, engineers are testing the many systems on board.
The LEM, I think, is like a big line of dominoes, every one of which has an effect upon the one it's associated with. And nothing can occur in one that doesn't somehow affect the others or the total mission.
So, LEM-1 coasts on, guided by its onboard programmer, seen only by the radar eyes of the tracking network, watched over by the men in mission control.
We will not pulse the engine. The maneuver is go at this time based on the onboard. 41. Roger, Houston is on. Roger, Houston is go for the burn.
The lunar module nears the Australian coast. The Carnarvon tracking station takes command. The time is nearing for the first burn of the descent engine, the first rocket engine designed to be throttled, a necessary feature for a lunar landing. This will be its first burn in space.
Mark, predicted ignition. Dips on. Dips on. 10%. 10%.
On.
We got a ping caution. Program caution.
Roger.
Dips off.
But something goes wrong. Instead of the full 38-second burn, the engine shuts down after only 4 seconds.
Roger,
An early look at the data indicates the onboard computer did not allow for the tolerances and errors within this most complex of all missions. It shut down the descent engine when it sensed an error of less than 1.5 seconds. And computers don't argue.
Capability of a crew, I think, is very significant in that you can change your mind in flight. You don't have to be restricted by the rather narrow capabilities of any pre-programmed mission.
Faced with the unexpected, the computer made the only decision it could, and it was the wrong one. Now the success of the mission rests squarely on the team in mission control and in the tracking stations. The nominal plan is out the window. On communications lines all over the world, the alternates are discussed. But the final word must come from Flight Director Gene Kranz.
I guess our best plan here, and I think the way we're going to go is alternate Charlie. Go ahead. In the attitude you've got. Go ahead. At 6:15 elapsed. Go ahead. Okay.
The long throttle burn of the descent engine would be cut to 2 minutes and occur during its pass over the United States. Then the descent engine would go to 100% thrust preparatory for the biggest test of the mission, fire in the hole.
Cutting off.
Let's suppose that we're descending using the descent engine and suddenly we discover some fault in the descent or the ascent stage for that matter. Well, we would like to return to a safe lunar orbit. So what we would do is essentially abort, fire the ascent stage while it's still connected to the descent stage, and then milliseconds later fire the pyros that separate the two stages.
Roger, you have dip's arm.
We show the ignition discrete. We show first chamber pressure. First chamber pressure is gone. We're burning, the rates are good. It's a good burn. We go.
Over California now, up and down the power scale. The first rocket engine capable of controlled variations of its propulsion force is passing the test. This is the time of maximum stress on the lunar module and on the men, flight controllers, astronauts, and engineers, to whom Lunar Module 1 represents years of their professional lives. And now there is another factor. A second test for the ascent stage is a burn to depletion of its propellant. This was to come one orbit after fire in the hole to test the restart capability of the engine. Now, if it looks critical, this burn will be combined with fire in the hole.
Max thrust. Raj.
Fourth stage.
Staging. Raj, staging. Apps on. Okay, let's watch this. We got 60 seconds. Let's make a good go-no-go here. Flight fighter, we're looking at White Sands track. It is good. It's solid. We're go. Raj. We have a 93.
The burn is good.
Increasing. We're go.
Lunar Module 1 is performing fantastically well as a spacecraft.
Keep me advised.
The shutdown order is given after 60 seconds of ascent burn. Now it is time for the burn to depletion. However, as the lunar module continues its flight, the Earth has rotated under it until it has moved nearly off the tracking range. LAM-1 will now pass over only one station, Hawaii, that can give the new and accurate information its computer needs, and can command the engine to restart. It looks like on the coming pass, Hawaii will send the update, and on the next, send the command signal. But now another problem crops up.
Flight, we're going to run out of RCS and B here the way we're going.
Okay, Jack, let's stay cool.
Because of the new mode of flight, the Attitude rockets are running low on propellant. It looks as though these small but critical engines may not last for 2 more orbits. But an update of orbit information shows that Lunar Module 1 will just pass within range of the Carnarvon station, whose range has been extended by the addition of the tracking ship Coastal Sentry Quebec, CSQ. Flight Director Kranz makes his decision. Update at Carnarvon and fire at Hawaii. It's go for the burn.
Guidance from flight, we're having a lot of dropouts.
Roger, flight.
ECOM, let him know when he's clear to command again. Go.
But the pass over Carnarvon is too short. The full update does not get to the lunar module, including an instruction that would have drained some of the propellant from the ascent engine tanks into the tanks of the Attitude rockets. Without this propellant, it is doubtful if the final ascent burn can be ignited. Now it gets tight. Tank pressure is just enough. It has to be this orbit. The flight team is under the gun. Kranz's plan is time critical. The rest of the information will be sent up early during the Hawaii pass. After a quick guidance check, the ascent propulsion system will be fired. The signal to ignite the engine is PRA-5.
Jeff, clock and compare pulses.
That's negative, flight. We got a spacecraft reject on that. We don't show any clock compare pulses, flight.
Retransmit. Guidance execute PRA start.
It's go. The burn works.
Okay,
We'll leave 90.
About 2 minutes after ignition, Attitude fuel runs out, and Lunar Module 1 at maximum thrust is pinwheeling through space. The word passes, it's a wild ride. And at shutdown, it holds.
You got it?
All systems are still operating as expected, beyond what was expected.
flight? You gonna transmit an ag selector for me?
It's been a tremendous test of the engine, and that's what it was all about.
Do you want me to stand by here?
Negative, you've done it all, and good work, Gary. Beautiful job.
Throughout the flight of Apollo 5, the lunar module had performed magnificently. All systems operated either as predicted or far exceeded the predictions. The inability of an onboard computer to cope with a programming error was overcome by the infinitely more flexible mind of man. Hundreds of additional commands sent from Earth put the lunar module through a demanding real-time test. So, Lunar Module 1 tumbles on through space, its orbit decaying mathematically until it is destroyed by the atmosphere of an Earth on which it was created, but to which it cannot return. Lunar Module 1 was the first space test of a manned vehicle designed to explore another world. This was the flight of the machine. Soon, it will be time for man.